is always known. Non-being is also ascertained by knowing, not by not knowing. Then which arises in which? Does knowledge of nothingness arise from existing consciousness, or does consciousness arise from nothingness? Even when objects that appear to be other than consciousness become known, such objects are never really non-consciousness in essence, as is evident from our subjecting ourselves to our own knowing. Hello friends and namaste. As we turn now to verse 7 of Arivu, a poem of course by Narayana Guru, together with the explanations of the verse by Guru Muni Prasad. I've had a bit of a break because of namely two major events in my life. The first is becoming a grandmother to Ari, and very soon after I had surgery. Such is the ebb and flow of life, polarities tossing as wave rising and falling. I love being back at my desk again and recording on these early mornings when night is not night and morning is actually not morning. A faint whisper as the shapes of the trees and the buildings become objects in the distance, sitting between that which is visible and not visible. And I think that's really apt for verse 7, which is looking at knowing and not knowing. I would like to reference a beautiful line from a great poet, Robert Frost. He said, "We dance around in a ring and suppose, but the secret sits in the middle and knows." And verse 7 speaks of the secret in the middle. Well, actually, all of these verses of the entire poem of Arivu, from verses 1 to 14, is of the secret, the pure consciousness. In a crux, the meaning in this verse 7 is that everything is consciousness. So there are various forms of knowledge, from when we kind of recognize the familiar objects, which we then retrieve from our treasure of memories of images. These are known objects. Then there are those things we do not know. And the question is, how do we know that we do not know them? Surely, if we ascertain that we do not know them, how does this awareness of not knowing come to us? This is the major question here. It comes out of knowledge that knows that it does not know. Does this awareness then mean that what we do not know comes out of nothing, or does it come out of consciousness? Isn't it true that nothing can sprout without a seed? And whilst the seed may not know what it will become when it has sprouted, whether, for example, it will be a blade of grass or a weed, it cannot sprout out of nothing. Similarly, the not knowing cannot come out of nothing. It must come out of the same and only one consciousness. The fact that some things are known and some things are not known means these are manifest forms known as bhavas. Whether we know them or not, it is all part and parcel of the same consciousness. For example, the water that is in my glass on my table, or the drops of dew on a rose, or the steam that rises from the kettle, or the block of ice from the freezer, or the bucket of water from the well. Isn't it all water? Manifesting itself or appearing in different ways. Ultimately, water is water, and it can be still, it can be contained, flow through the tap or in the river, in the sea, and such is conditioned consciousness. Can we imagine what of unconditioned pure consciousness? Now let's turn to the explanations by Guru Muni Prasad. There's a section called expansion, and it goes as such. We always have the experience of knowing one object after another. Even I do not know is an experience arising in the consciousness. It never is mere absence of knowing. Then does non-knowledge arise in knowledge or consciousness? Or does knowledge just arise from nothingness? The truth is that non-knowledge arises out of consciousness. We usually become aware of various objects as if we are knowing something other than consciousness, but that the essential content of the object, or what is non-knowledge, is also none other than consciousness, becomes evident to us only when we make ourselves the object of our knowledge. And now we move on to the greater explanations. It goes like this. We know certain things. Certain other things we do not know. I know that is the feeling we have about all the things we are familiar with. In my knowledge about myself, as well as in my knowledge about the world, my experience is of knowing and not knowing. There is no one who knows everything. Asked about anything we do not know, we simply respond, I do not know that. To say I do not know that also expresses a knowledge. To say I do not know still falls within the range of knowledge. I can as well say, I know that I don't know, but saying I do not know that I do not know makes no sense. That means just as knowing is a state of functional consciousness, so is not knowing. Then the question arises, does not knowing emerge from the being of consciousness, or does consciousness or knowledge emerge from nothingness? Knowing and not knowing are both experiences welling up from one and the same consciousness. Therefore, we have to admit that the absence of knowledge also has its source in the being of consciousness. As we have already seen, consciousness has no state of non-existence, known as abhava. Then, knowing and not knowing are bhavas, which means manifest forms, assumed by the one consciousness that is no abhava. That means these apparent manifest forms arise from that which has no abhava, non-existence. The abhava experience, meaning I do not know, also thus arises as a bhava, the manifest form, of the one unmanifest consciousness. In short, from the consciousness that has no non-existence arises the experience of non-existence. On the other hand, the statement, the event of knowing happens in the non-existent consciousness, is self-contradictory, and as such, an event is impossible. Now, even when objects become known, that which is known is called an object, the Sanskrit equivalent being visaya. Our concept is that mind or consciousness knows external objects. One of the implications of this concept is the notion that the known object is different from the knowing mind or consciousness. The question both in philosophy and science, how do the objects that are merely inert matter find unity with mind, resulting in our objective knowledge, remains still unanswered. This question is an offshoot of the above-mentioned preconceived notion of the separateness of mind and matter. Never non-consciousness in essence. Every object is something that becomes known to a knowing mind. Are such objects non-consciousness? which means non-self, in essential content, that these objects also are different facets of the self-manifestation of the one consciousness, known as Chit, is the basic stance of Vedanta. Such a perspective is not known to most of us simply because our minds are conditioned by modern education that created the notion of the separateness of mind and matter in our minds. We need to give up all such prejudices which, we're not sure, are scientifically admissible or not, and start our thinking anew. Such a search for reality leads us to the basic understanding that what appear as inert matter and thinking mind are but different transient forms assumed by the one unconditioned consciousness that alone has real existence. Mind and matter thus find unity and become lost in the being of the unconditioned consciousness, referred to as Tat or that in the Upanishads. Subjecting ourselves to our own knowing. There is a context in which it becomes revealed that what appears as object is also pure consciousness in content. It is when we make ourselves the object of our knowledge. That means when I know myself, then the object to be known is I. This I is neither the physical body, senses, the mind, intellect, or anything that could be thought of as mine, but is the possessor of all such. That this I is merely a subjective experience of the luminous existence is evident to all of us. Now, who is the subject or the one who knows? That also is I. Are there two I's then? One, the subject, and the other, the object. As we are quite sure, no such two I's exist. That means when I know myself, one and the same, I, or consciousness, assumes the role of the subject on the one side and of the object on the other. That one consciousness that can assume these two roles when I know myself can also do the same when I know other objects also. And really, that is what happens. A Vedantin's perception of a subject knowing an object is not as the coming together and becoming one of two entities of entirely opposite natures. Really, the union is between the one manifest form called subject and the other manifest form called object of one and the same consciousness or Atma. The real event in the union of the two is simply the two realizing their intrinsic oneness. This momentary realization of the non-dual Atma is what we, in our transaction, refer to as a specific knowledge. Water assumes the form of the pot or pan it is poured into. This change of form in the water is caused by its contact with the respective conditioning factors, that is, with pots, pans, and the like. Similar is the difference between subject and object. Both are different apparent forms assumed by one consciousness because of its contact with two different conditioning factors known as upadhis. Such conditioning factors are also forms assumed by the one reality owing to its own mysterious creative power. The union of the two results in consciousness actualizing and experiencing its actual oneness by foregoing the two conditioning factors and thus transcending the subject-object duality. The event of giving up the conditioning factors is counted in modern thought as the union of subject and object. The enlightened ones alone perceive this as a momentary sparking of non-dual experience that goes on incessantly. Others consider it as a subject gaining the knowledge of an object. This latter perception only takes us back to the already mentioned unanswerable question. The entire perceptible world, though considered an object of knowledge, thus in essential content is consciousness alone. This brings us to the end of verse 7 and the explanations. And of course, if you want to actually see the verses in text and the book, it is in the book by Guru Muni Narayana Prasad, and the book is called Shorter Philosophical Poems of Narayana Guru. Thank you for listening.